Everybody, Scott McElroy at Auburn University here. I'm going to do part of a presentation that I had set up for a webinar in June of 2025, and I'm going to break this up into parts. And this is one of the parts about PGRs for POA control, and specifically focused on the PGR Anuew for POA annua control. Anuew is prohexadione calcium. It's a rather new PGR compared to things like Primo, Trinexpac-ethyl, and especially things like paclobutrazol and flurplermidol, which were, really go back probably to the 80s, early 80s, that they were first introduced in various uses. But prohexadione calcium has been around for a while. It just recently has began to increase in its use and really necessity in turf. And what we looked at in this study is POA annua control specifically. So we dealt with the Anuew EZ product, which is a liquid formulation of the product. So everything's going to be in fluid ounces per acre, as opposed to the old WDG formulation, which was in ounces per acre. But you can look at the old labels if you're used to the WDG product to get an idea of where we're at with respect to the different rates of the two products. The main thing to understand about this study, because there's going to be a few things that pop out, and the main thing to understand is did we do things on basically a 3-week interval or a 4-week interval? Because what's going to come out in the study is that if you want to use PGRs for POA control, especially for reducing seed heads, reducing the presence of POA in a perennial ryegrass overseeded stand, you really need to be more towards that 3-week interval, and we'll probably end up looking at 2-week intervals next year as well to see if we can manipulate the rates in order to dial it in. But we feel really good this year about what we saw with 3-week intervals. Okay, so the things to pay attention to is we use prohexadione calcium, Anuew EZ, at 18 fluid ounces and 26 fluid ounces, and you can see roughly a 3-week interval. That's the ACEGH. That's the way we kind of label things, as you'll see it in. So if there's more letters, 3-week interval; less letters, 4-week intervals is what we did. And we started back in February 3rd because we wanted to get out ahead of seed head formation. We also looked at the Regiment EZ, which is back, which was the Bispirabac sodium product that's now come back to the turfgrass market. It is an ALS inhibitor because there's already some resistance to it out there, and probably there was some ALS resistance in our study that we had. Proxy is our standard seed head suppression control product, and then Primo Max and this Primo Proxy combination as well is going to be our standard mix when it comes to seed head suppression, growth regulation of POA in perennial ryegrass. Right? So let's skip ahead to the actual data. So if we look early on and we look at what we saw early on, we needed a high rate, 26 fluid ounces, 3-week interval in order to get adequate control of POA annua in the perennial ryegrass stand. Would like to state that for the most part, except for the regiment applications, we really didn't see any perennial ryegrass injury throughout the study. But that's really the only thing we saw, and it was what I would consider minor for the most part. But everything else was no perennial ryegrass injury. But what we did see with that 26 fluid ounces of Anuew on a 3-week interval, we did definitely see an increase in POA control, and you can see it really is outshining. You do see the Regiment Anuew combination on tighter intervals as well was also having an effect, but still it was just that Anuew alone early on is what was giving us the seed head suppression and POA annua control early on. Now when we got later in the study and we see that even the 4-week intervals and the lower rates of Anuew was having an even greater effect on POA. This is the percent seed head suppression here. So this is just reducing the amount of seed heads, because that's really, at the end of the day, that's really all we're expecting out of these. Can we reduce the seed heads? Can we mask the POA presence and prevent it from producing seeds the next year? And so we saw that all of these are actually giving us an effect. but it was that 3-week interval early on that allowed us to really get a hold of what was going on. And I would still say it's the 3-week interval of the 18 fluid ounce and the 26 fluid ounce that is giving us a little bit superior control, although statistically no significant difference. And even the proxy Anuew combination is not statistically different, although there was a visual drop there, which means we probably got some plot-to-plot variation as we went. Okay, and you know, some of our old standbys are just not holding up as well as Anuew. Now, here's the thing with Anuew. Here's our non-treated. You can see the amount of POA. You can see it kind of popping up in the stand here, but we look at the proxy and pretty much the same thing. We're seeing a lot of POA in the plot. But then here's our Anuew repeat applications on 3-week interval, 26 fluid ounces. Here's the thing with Anuew. We know this about Anuew. It is a way more, prohexadione calcium is a way more potent inhibitor of cool season grasses than it is warm season grasses. Okay? So that's the number one thing to understand, is that it will growth regulate warm season grasses, Bermuda grass. However, it's just a much more potent inhibitor of cool season grasses. That's what we think really is what's giving us the level of control. And you can see, you know, the dark green turf here with the growth regulation. The Bermuda grass is starting to peek through actually at this point in time. So we don't get that inhibition of the Bermuda grass during transition like you would get out of a Trimmet or a Cutlass, paclobutrazol or flurprimidol. And then you can see the POA and the lack of perennial ryegrass density where we did not spray in the dot to dot along the plots, in the orange plots, okay? Orange dots. And you can see, again, here's the non-treated plot. We jump to kind of a comparison here. Here's the Anuew at 18. Here's the Anuew at 26 as well. Wish we had a better perennial ryegrass stand here. And then here's the Anuew at 26, but more spaced out, 4-week intervals. The Anuew at 18, more 4-week intervals. You just get much more POA annua control when you go to those 3-week intervals. So thoughts and conclusions on this one. Perennial ryegrass was removed with the revolver in late May, and we saw no difference in the Bermuda grass green up. So that means the Bermuda grass was greening up fine, was not inhibited, and we saw no difference in transition. The 18 and 26 ounces at 3 weeks seems to be kind of what we're looking at. There's a lot more data because we took data every week. I just showed you a snapshot. But it's actually, I think, is actually being controlled. It's not just suppressed. It's not just seed head suppression. What I think we're actually getting is actual control. Our higher rates needed early on to decrease and then you can lower the rate later. That's probably a possibility based off what we saw, because we saw early on we really needed that higher rate to get the suppression, but then we didn't need it later on, which means it probably, you know, we got it was able to take hold, that lower rate. I don't know quite the way to say that, but it definitely did work later on. And then proxy seems to add little, but it could be a backup in a worst case scenario. It certainly didn't seem to hurt things per se, maybe, but it could be a backup in a worst case scenario. So we're not throwing proxy out quite yet, but we do know that this a new product seems to be, you know, the real deal when it comes to POA annua control, certainly seed head suppression and likely control. So I'm going to do some other videos that you can check out as well, but this is the first one that I have for this follow-up from the 2024-2025 growing season and some ideas that may be working well for you.